Good evening, and I'm delighted to be here, just a little bit nervous, but I'll be all right once I get going. I'd first like to say a very warm thank you to the British Council and to the Garage and its partners for inviting me to come and speak to you. It's a real privilege. It's my first time in Russia, my first time in Moscow, and you brought the weather, so, you know. It's just great. I will tell everybody that there's bright sunshine in Moscow, because this is what I have experienced. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to speak on the Theories and Practice of Cultural Leadership program. My talk this evening is essentially going to focus on the way that we are able to build what I call an infrastructure for cultural leadership. And it's how we have managed to do it in the UK. Very important to say that by infrastructure, I mean the essential structures that make cultural leadership happen. And that is the learning and the harnessing of knowledge, of skills, and practices in cultural leaders. It is the cultural leadership learning of individuals. So how do we support leaders to lead cultural institutions? How do we support leaders to lead cultural activities? What is the best way to pass on experience? Do you have to do a course in order to be a cultural leader? Or is there value in learning by experiencing, learning on the job? So this infrastructure that I refer to is a hybrid one, requiring systems and processes and attitudes as much as institutions of bricks and mortar. What I'm focusing on are the human elements that need to be in place in order to support successful leadership. So my focus is on a human infrastructure. That is actually the infrastructure that makes culture happen. As I say, this is my first visit to Moscow, and in being here, I am fulfilling my own aspirations to find out more about how cultural leadership works here. So what I have is an offer. It is sharing of the experience from the UK. I do not expect that everything will be transferable, that you will be able to just say, okay, so this happens in the UK, therefore it must happen here. That's not how culture works. Culture works very much in its own context. So we have to look at skills and systems and processes that are transferable, that are adaptable, that can work in a local situation. So my speech to you this evening is an offer. It's an offer that I expect you to conjure with, open it up, look at what's inside, and take the elements that work for you, as opposed to taking the whole thing itself and then putting it in the corner and saying, I don't really think I want to open that up. Please do explore with me. What I want to do is to share the approach that we took in the UK. What I'll start with is my own, little bit about my own background, and then talk a little bit about the UK context so that you can understand where we are coming from. And it's very interesting. I have had a couple of conversations today with leaders from different cultural institutions, and it seems to me that there are a number of parallels with what's happening here in different parts of Russia in terms of leading culture. But one of the things that I also want to share is where I, as a cultural leader, have benefited from learning on the job, where I, as a cultural leader, am now trying to translate that into cultural leadership practice for others. I'm going to try also to draw out some of the complexities and challenges of leading culture in the current climate, to look at the skills and competences that the cultural leader needs to have within their portfolio. So we start with the infrastructure and we end with the people and the competences that they might have. At the end of it all, I'll be very happy to take any questions that you might have, and I'm very open to discussing the points that I raise, but you might also be curious about some of the things that I'm not able to fit into the speech. So it's worth reminding ourselves that the cultural and creative industries are not a small sector, neither in the UK nor here in Moscow. In the early 2000s in the UK, these sectors made up an average 7% contribution to the gross domestic product. And by comparison, you will know that our financial services in the UK are also strong, and they are the largest, but the cultural sector contributes one of the second largest contributions to our gross domestic product. Our current figures, even in a negative financial climate, say that we are still contributing around 6%. And this level of contribution of culture to the wider economy is matched across Europe, where it represents on a whole 7% of European gross domestic product. And it is 6.5% of European employment. The number of people who are working in our fields amounts to about 6.5%. Those figures come back from 2016. Beyond any financial return of culture on society, it is also important to look at what culture contributes to us as a people. And this quote comes from the Warwick Commission in a report that looked at the value that culture gives to Britain. I won't read it all, but I draw your attention to the sentence that says, "The extraordinary cultural and creative talents we share contribute to the well-being of our society, to our economic success, our national identity, and to the UK's global influence." So we're looking at the culture being a part of what we're identified with across the UK as a whole. It's part of what we are known for. Today's arts and cultural creative sectors encompass a broad spectrum of organizations. So we have the well-established opera houses, we have small creative businesses striving to gain full and proper recognition for their work. The sector also includes individuals, artists, makers, producers, curators, who must combine artistic and creative innovation with influence, advocacy, and resilience to deliver at the highest levels. From concert halls to festivals, museums to pop-up galleries, the field is dynamic and it's also diverse. And so too are the range of skills, competences, and experiences that we need to be able to be successful in leading these cultural institutions and cultural activities. So the complexities of leadership and management are topics that I have been exploring for much of my career, whilst I've been leading organizations, leading activities, and leading programs. But one of the things that has been constant through my career is that my work continues to be motivated by the belief that I have in the values of culture and arts to impact society. There is, of course, the instrumental value. We do combat social challenges. We are effective as bastions of societal change, and we can be at the heart of community development. But let us not play down the intrinsic value of culture on our lives, the joyful impact of interacting with creativity and being inspired by the imagination, innovation, and the sheer ingenuity of these sectors. Culture is something that we experience because it uplifts our lives as well as contributing to society. So what brought me into the cultural sphere was exposure through school, through education. I went to venues like the Royal Opera House, like Sadler's Wells, the Young Vic Theatre, key London institutions of culture. And those were the opportunities that were provided to me, a very average South London girl, to find her creative expression and then to develop a career. So I will forever be a champion of arts education in schools. Otherwise, individuals like me who weren't necessarily through their families being brought into cultural institutions would never have the chance of fulfilling or finding our vocational call. And what keeps me in the sector over 30 years later is a passion. My passion starts with dance, which was my training, but it then helped me to move from the practice of dance into the practice of arts administration, then arts policy, and 9 years of directing dance as the director of dance for Arts Council England. At the end of those 9 years of developing policy for dancers, I wanted to have a broader career, so I expanded my brief to become Director of Arts in London for Arts Council England. And with a number of different experiences, strategic experiences, I broadened yet again beyond the arts and into wider cultural development and cultural policy. And this included a secondment to London 2012, the Olympic bid team. And that was a real learning curve. I learned very quickly that not everyone shares my passion for culture. It was a wonderful opportunity to be amongst a group of sports people who were embracing culture. And you will remember the games in 2012. I know there was something in Sochi, but hey, London 2012. London 2012 was an amazing thing to have contributed to, because one of the real values that it taught me was how you can use culture alongside sport to start to change how a nation sees itself, to start to change the opportunities and the perspectives of individuals who, at the end of our games, could see that we could deliver absolutely fantastic international experiences, not just for the people of the UK, but worldwide. So for the young generation growing up, knowing that we had delivered that, that was a very powerful experience. From 2006 to 2011, I ran something called the Cultural Leadership Program, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that. But more recently, I've been working in my own consultancy, delivering cultural leadership development, creating, designing, and delivering programs that are about how we can strengthen the practice of cultural leadership. Now, as director of the Clore Leadership Program, I'm very privileged to be able to work with a very long-established, well-established program that has been going for 14 years. I'm working at the heart of leadership development for people and organizations in the UK. It means that I have a very, very inspiring job. It's something that motivates me on a grey day. Not that we have very many grey days in London, but it inspires me to be able to work with people and with cultural institutions. But I mentioned the Cultural Leadership Program, which is at the heart of what I'm going to share with you today. And for that, we need to track back a few years to 2006, which was when I was director of that program, a 5-year, £22 million program, which was £22 million of government money investing in cultural leadership. As I look back now, that program has ended, I go, wow, the government decided that it would put the investment into culture. And it decided that what was necessary, as well as supporting our institutions, was to support the people who lead those institutions. Unusually for the UK, this program worked right across the cultural sector. So it was the arts, it was build heritage, all the way through theatre, dance, music, to commercial and creative industries, advertising and design. So it was quite a breadth of cultural experience. The Cultural Leadership Program came about as a direct intervention from government to tackle the perceived crisis of leadership as we entered the 21st century. Because when we thought about it, in the decade before then, there had not been a lot of investment in cultural leadership. And so despite that, London and the UK is known for our cultural institutions. We have an internationally respected reputation. We simply had not invested in the individuals who would lead these cultural institutions. And so this resource coming from the government was both timely, but it was also strategic. And I had the privilege of being able to help to design what it would contain and how it would be run. So through a rather eclectic range of opportunities, industry partnerships, and cascaded programs, the Cultural Leadership Program set about delivering its mission, which was to nurture and develop world-class, dynamic, and diverse leadership for the 21st century. The UK Cultural Leadership Programme was a government-funded sector-wide development, promoted and delivered in a dispersed manner. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that the learning was happening within our cultural institutions, so that we were not creating yet just new structures, but we were actually creating structures within cultural organizations. With a sector-wide remit, a new collaboration of sector lead bodies, the Cultural Leadership Programme set out to build on existing leadership practice, not to just pilot in new initiatives. We did want to incubate models, but we wanted to incubate models that came from the sector. We wanted to create that stable infrastructure to enshrine sustainable leadership development within a fast-changing landscape. So in launching the Cultural Leadership Programme at Downing Street, Gordon Brown, who was then Chancellor of the Exchequer, spoke of the sector moving from the margins into the mainstream of government policy. This was the government really taking hold of culture and cultural leadership and saying this is a priority for us. They had identified cultural leadership as a key strategic intervention. So in the first year, the investment was £12 million of Treasury funds, followed by another 10 million 2 years later, a clear marker of the importance of culture within the government environment. Through enabling our sector leaders to nurture the vision, the attitude, the skills to deliver excellence, experimentation, and innovation as core attributes of leadership practice. It set the goal of improving the whole performance of the sector over the medium to long term. So we were not looking at just one initiative. We wanted to really change cultural practice. The program began with a call for ideas, which was a chance to check in with the sector, because we have a sector that's very well established, to discover the precise nature of its leadership challenge and the preferred approaches and partnerships that would meet their desires. So we were speaking to cultural leaders, existing and up and coming, to make sure that the kinds of activities we were developing were suited to how they like to learn and what it is that they needed to know. It was a way of tackling the time and money challenge. Very little time, very little money, very challenging. We had to tackle better governance. We wanted to tackle the diversity in the sector. We wanted to ensure that we could work within cultural institutions and provide those learning opportunities within and inside our cultural practice. And we also wanted to try and develop better routes through cultural leadership for individuals so that you can navigate and steer your career inside institutions, periods of working independently, etc. So the call for ideas played quite a critical role in shaping what the provision was. Because we worked with the sector, we did not impose our ideas upon them. We were able to then determine a series of programs that tackled a number of different objectives. And we ended up with this range of provision. We had intensive courses so that you could go and do a 2-week course just about leadership, learning about yourself, learning about the practices, the skills of leadership. If that was not available to you, you could also look at learning inside your cultural institution. What is it that I can learn in the stage department? What is it that I can learn in the collections department? What is it that I can learn through running a festival? So work-based learning, really optimizing what those skills there are. We looked also at online learning because especially now, but we're talking a decade ago, there's a lot that you can just download. Whilst I'm still asking questions, my children don't even think. They just go, right, I'm going to ask Google. Other services are available. But they just tap straight in. So that online learning, what should we put for free on the internet? What should be paid for? So we looked also at online provision. We looked at governance, which is really how cultural institutions are run from the top. Our boards of directors, our trustees, the top leadership who determines the strategic vision and then develops that into practice. What is it that needs to be happening at the top of a cultural institution so that the policy and practice is appropriate to different audiences, both inside and outside? We looked at the area of diversity. How can we make sure that we are getting a good balance, gender balance, that we are getting a good balance of ethnicity, that we are getting a good balance of social class? We looked at a range of different areas of diversity to make sure that we were working with cultural leaders so that they were learning from the past practice, but also dealing with contemporary practice and taking that forward. And one of the ways to do that was through entrepreneurship. It's very interesting when you're running certain cultural institutions, if you get investment from the state or from the government, and that's a secure position, then you are able to act in one way. But if you have to be entrepreneurial, if you have to go out and find your resources, if you have to deal with different funders, different providers of finance, then you act in a different way. And that way is entrepreneurial. And we wanted to make sure that with the declining resources coming from the state, from government, that our cultural leaders were developing those entrepreneurial ways of thinking, those entrepreneurial muscles, as it were, to ensure that they could survive. Remember, we wanted this to be a program that changed cultural practice over the medium to long term, not just in one moment in time. So those areas of provision were at the heart of the program. We wanted to make sure that we were investing in as broad a range as possible. But from the outset, the Cultural Leadership Program that determined that it would work, as I said, with our cultural institutions. It would have what we call a dispersed model of leadership, so that the leadership was happening inside our cultural institutions, across our cultural institutions, that we wouldn't just have, you would go to this place and do one thing, that you could access cultural leadership from different parts, different levels in your career, different parts of the country. We wanted access to be really critical. We also wanted to make sure that we were providing different types of learning experience. So yes to entrepreneurial, but also some people do work in those institutions where there are cultural hierarchies, and you want to be able to navigate those as well. So the issue of one size doesn't fit all is really important. We wanted cultural leaders to be nimble, to be able to move across different areas of practice. So the Cultural Leadership Program created professional development opportunities that would target the individual leader working within a hierarchy, but also coaching and facilitative leadership models to encourage leadership across teams and groups as well. We wanted to really ensure that our leaders could work anywhere. We also wanted to develop provision that worked right across the sectors. So we wanted to make sure that the museums professionals, the theatre professionals, and the creative design professionals understood each other's area of practice and could work successfully together. We also encourage what we call learning by doing. So actually delivering a project, making it happen, not just learning the theory, but very much putting it into practice, delivering a festival, running a season, making sure that something happened in terms of cultural provision. One of the things that we did as a program ourselves was we tried things out live. Sometimes you are able to write the policy document and then you incubate it and then you test it, then you revise it, and when it's shiny and polished, you can put it out. But if you have to work quickly, you have to be more rapid. And by working with our cultural institutions, we were really able to test it. Does it work? No, then stop it. Does it work? Yes, fantastic. Let's do it. Let's share it with the wider cultural sector. Let's bring on other partners. So we developed a very nimble type of working. So our cultural leadership footprint includes crafts, libraries, archives, the historic, performing, literal, visual arts, as well as advertising. We have a range of different cultural industries that we were putting together. What we wanted to make sure was that we had a strong sector-facing, not just institutions, but the sector as a whole, a strong sector-facing profile, so that we worked with industry professionals who came directly from those sectors. They came onto our board. They were our advisors. We drew on the expertise of respected individuals who were very well known within their sector. We brought them, so they were the people who were teaching how to run our institutions alongside academics. So we mixed the two together. We wanted very much to acknowledge the expertise that we have. That board had a pivotal role in visioning, in shaping, and in advocating what the priorities for the program should be, and also making sure that we were delivering high quality, that we were being relevant, and that we were innovating. We also had an ambition to be sustainable, to make sure that we were working with partners, and to make sure that the sector itself was learning how to develop cultural leadership. And that proved very healthy, because when the program went away after 5 years, we could see that the way that we had worked meant that the institutions had already adapted those practices. So the institutions could continue even beyond the existence of the program itself. We worked with industry-based coaches, with mentors, with advisors, service providers, as well as creative and cultural organizations, turning them into centers of learning. We use specialist sector knowledge combined with intelligent commissioning and smart industry-led partnerships. We wanted to make sure that we had a method of delivery that was cost-effective and inclusive. So in our first year, we commissioned 9 programs delivered by sector providers. And in our third year, we commissioned 22 programs. So we had a very small infrastructure. In my team at the beginning, we were a team of 3. At the end, we were a team of 6. I was very tired. My team were very tired. But what we wanted was to make sure that the institutions who will be there after 5 years, they also had that learning. It's very important, if you think about legacy planning, to plan for the future. And that was one of the things that we were able to do. To strengthen the awareness of the skills that the individuals would need, we also developed a competency framework, which is an overview of skills, attitudes, and behaviors that would underscore the individual's place on the leadership journey. So we worked with this model. So what we tried to do was to create a framework so that the cultural leader could say, what is it that I need to know? I'm here in my cultural leadership journey. What is the best training that I should have? What is the experience that I need? Because one of the things that we do in culture, in certain extents, it's quite informal. And we wanted to help leaders to understand, should I be developing national partnerships, international partnerships? Should I have a mentor? You should always have a mentor. Should I be mentoring individuals? You should always be mentoring individuals. So we created this framework so that you could look at, if I am a mid-career leader, what kind of learning should I be doing? If I am an established leader, how should I be working? What is available to me? And this was one of the first times that as a sector, we looked at what are the skills that you need to run a cultural institution. If we look at what we call the ecology of leadership, what we were trying to do was to make sure that the program could work on a number of levels, that we could provide activities that would develop the individual leader to help them to access leadership learning no matter where they were in their careers, whether they were emerging leaders or established leaders. We wanted to find the right kind of provision. For organizations, how do we pull together as a team? What is the learning that we should know? How are the partnerships that we should have? Who can I connect with successfully? How can I make sure that the experience within my institution is a learning experience? Should I be taking my people in one department and moving them to another? What is it that I can do, and how can I do that successfully? But also we were looking at moving the sector as a whole. So we were trying to develop recognized standards. We were trying to make sure that this infrastructure was sustainable so that you could, over 2 years, over 5 years, over 10 years, still be developing your networks for cultural leadership and understanding what was at the heart of good practice. So we wanted to operate on what we call an ecology of leadership for the leader as an individual, for the organization collectively, and putting all of those together for the cultural leadership sector. Very ambitious, but hey, why not? So in addition to the proven canon of leadership learning, and in order to meet the aspirational demands of the sectors, the Cultural Leadership Programme also explored a range of cross-cutting development priorities, where the nature of the provision required further experimentation. So if you're looking at how do I run a cultural institution, we can tell you about different things that you should learn. But there were also issues and areas around cultural practice that were not so clear-cut. And we wanted to be able to stimulate practice in those areas also. So one of those areas was about diversity. It was about making sure that people could engage in our cultural provision, no matter whether they were based in a rural area or in an urban area, no matter what their ethnic background, no matter what their gender, no matter what their social class. What is it that I need to do as a cultural leader to make sure that I am really reaching the people who I want to come into my institution to engage with my practice? We also looked at the artist as leader. How do artists lead their organizations, their companies, their activities? So in the UK, we have a number of institutions that are led by the traditional chief executive officer role, the manager role. But we also have a number of vibrant organizations that are led by creatives, by artists. What is the practice that they need to develop to retain the artistic knowledge and the artistic intervention, but also to lead well? So we had a number of different activities that explored that practice as well. We looked at governance, as I said, in terms of leading that whole institution, and we looked also at international engagement. So in a global environment that's changing at quite a bewildering pace, the continuing health of this sector is dependent on its capacity to respond to a whole host of drivers, including external drivers that we don't control. Globalization, for instance, the change in demographics of new communities that arise up around us. So we need to have an international outlook that says we are not just working locally, but we are working nationally and internationally all the time. If your work is seen online, you do not know where your audience is. You cannot control that audience. So there are different people that are engaging. What is your attitude to international? Will you embrace it? Will you choose not to see it? So again, we wanted to look at what does the UK cultural leader benefit from understanding about the UK in the wider world. We looked at intercultural exchanges. What is it like to be in an area where you don't understand what's being said, where English is not the standard language? What is it like to try to lead when you don't have the authority, when the badge that you have is not enough to take you forward? How does that feel? How can you learn? How can you lead beyond that authority? And that's very important because we are working as cultural leaders, not in isolation in our institutions, but as part of wider communities. And we need to understand how to influence, how to navigate, and how to be part of that wider world. Alongside the suite of key programs, we also sought to champion debate and to make sure that we could give voice to the issues and the challenges that were being faced by our cultural leaders. So as well as learning how to run cultural institutions, we wanted to make sure that the voice of culture was heard in different debates. Debates about society, debates about what is happening in our local area, debates about human endeavor. We wanted to make sure that cultural leaders had that voice. So we made sure to train in presentation skills as well. We encouraged our debaters to enter into debates on our big national programs. We wanted to make sure that culture was not something that was just contained within a small group of people, but that we were navigating as part of a wider sector, as part of a society, because that is what we are. We are part of the society. But sometimes culture and arts can seem quite isolated. Well, we wanted to bust that out, and that required quite a lot of advocacy. One of the things that the Cultural Leadership Programme was successful in doing was creating a neutral space. We did not take sides. We were a neutral space at the centre of the profession, where questions and issues could be reviewed and rationalized. We set up a number of debates with people who were really opposed in terms of their views, and we said, let's share, and you as an audience can make up your mind. We weren't trying to tell you how to do things. We were trying to expose everyone to different practices of culture. So it underpinned its provision with commissioning of research, looking at some of the empirical research that's out there. What is it that happens? Qualitative as well as the quantitative research, discussions, dialogues. We wanted to really make sure that we were engendering cultural leaders who could lead institutions. They could lead institutions with facts, with figures, with opinion, and they could deliver facts, figures, opinion as well as their projects. We wanted the power to be within the cultural leader, within the cultural institutions. It was a fantastic program. After 5 years, we could say that actually one of the things that it engendered was confidence in the sector. And confidence is quite a difficult outcome, but as a professional, that confidence is quite key to how you offer yourself into the world, who you see yourself as. And that confidence was something that came back to us time and time again. But as well as the confidence in the cultural leaders, we managed to reach over 5,000 leaders per year through our provision, and that was talks and lectures as well as courses and work-based learning. We provided over 16,000 training days, and we had a regional spread that matched the distribution of cultural provision nationally. So we had quite a lot of activities that happened in different parts of the UK, in rural areas, as well as the urban areas. And one of the things that was really interesting was over time, we managed to grow the engagement in our programs through our most senior leaders who at the beginning thought, okay, this is training, so this is for the young ones. And actually what we managed to do, and you'll remember the circular diagram, was to say, actually, if you're going to be a leader in culture, that issue of learning is something that we want to be open to throughout our careers. I've been in this business now for over 30 years, and I just love learning. I think it's really important that we continue to be open to learning. Okay, so some of the basics of it, I know I could tell you them without thinking, but there is always something new to learn, and that attitude is really important that we have. So, as is often the case, after 5 years, the walls started to crumble down. And that wonderful £22 million of funding was no longer. Hey. So what do you do then? What do you do? When the money is there, it's great. You can have these fantastic ideas. You can develop these programs. You can share. It's great. But what do you do when the money is no longer there? We were very fortunate at the start of the program to be in a very healthy economic climate. This was in 2006. And the arts had fared very, very well in the 2000s as the British economy grew. But all of that was to change in 2008 with the financial crash, which was worldwide. So whilst the impact first affected the business sectors, it took a little while to reach the cultural sector, but it did come to us eventually. It has affected, in actual fact, every person, every cultural institution in the UK. The banks and the housing markets took the first hit, and by 2010, the decline in resources, the decline in government resources were quite stark, and those reductions in funding came to the cultural sector and came to the cultural leadership program. But this is where, as I say, the model of working that put us within cultural institutions with cultural partners in the sector is where we were able to have that sustainability and to have that longevity. It did pay off. And I gave a talk just last week to one of the networks that we established in 2006. They are museum leaders who are still going today, and they were very pleased to invite me to their annual conference. And I could say to them, yeah, this is amazing that over 11 years on, you are still working. But that was because of that approach. Very important to put the learning in the sector and to create infrastructures that can be self-sustaining over the long term. We have individuals who trained as coaches, who trained as facilitators, who trained as mentors. So we were creating that infrastructure that supports culture as well as creating that cultural infrastructure. We have a clear understanding of the value of the investment in leadership. So the question is no longer whether we should invest in our leaders, it is how do we find the resources. And so when we started the program, those training budgets within cultural institutions were non-existent. Now they're only small, but they are there. We have those budgets. There is an understanding that investing in our leaders is investing in cultural practice. And now I move to where I am now, which is the Clore Leadership Program. And the Clore Leadership Program is the longest standing leadership program in the UK. It was started back in 2004 and was also a response to that crisis of leadership that I talked about earlier. This response came from our key benefactor, Dame Vivienne Duffield, who pulled together a group of experts to say, how can we respond effectively to strengthening cultural leaders? How can we respond effectively to making sure that we can be sustainable and we can provide leaders for our institutions over time? Now, I only joined the program last September, so I can't take credit for its wonderful success. It has trained over 350 fellows, and our fellows undertake a one-year program. And it has supported over 1,500 others through courses and training programs. I guess what has become apparent in the UK model of cultural leadership is the essential requirement for a variety of approaches for flexibility in leadership learning to match the very eclectic nature of our sector as a whole. So cultural organizations operate using a wide variety of business models. They are a different variety of organizational types. We have large institutions who came about at after the Second World War. We have lots of micro businesses, small, 1, 2, 3, 5 individuals working in the creative industries, and they have a very distinctive character. The sector also includes a significant proportion of individuals, creative entrepreneurs, whose leadership practice may be through innovation, influence, and advocacy rather than organizational hierarchy. So we have to make sure that our cultural leadership practice responds to quite a wide field. Across this range of entities, the leadership practices differ significantly, and so it is important that the cultural leader is able to draw on a broad range of cultural leadership skills and approaches, to exploit the classical canon in opera and ballet, to channel the creativity of contemporary visual arts, to celebrate the dynamism of our theatrical repertoire, or reflect on the decisions and outcomes of social history by reviewing our museums and galleries through contemporary lenses. The ways of operating from sector to sector do indeed require specialist knowledge and particular expertise. But what has become apparent through our leadership programs is how much there is to gain from working across different sectors. How much there is to gain from understanding how the sectors work together. And so all of our programs are about bringing different individuals together, bringing people from different parts of the sector to understand and create new networks. That healthy exchange of experiences and approaches enriches and enhances the capacity of individual leaders to be effective back at base. Against this backdrop of complexity, variety, and dynamism, cultural leadership and the learning of cultural leadership is absolutely critical. It's critical for the mid-career middle management leader who's seeking to define their competences and make that step into that top position. It's critical for the established leader who must find the wherewithal to sustain proven success. You're not new to the profession, but you do have to innovate. You have to refresh, renew, and to maintain that competitive edge in an increasingly crowded market. That market includes diminishing public resources, increasing pressure on state funding, and both the traditional and the contemporary arts and culture fighting for space, fighting for audiences. So in some ways, leading culture in the 21st century is just the same as it ever was. The leader has to drive forward the vision. They have to maintain the engagement and commitment of stakeholders. They have to manage people. They have to manage programs. They have to manage the finances, what we call the bottom line. They have to make sure that their institutions and practices are sustainable and commercially viable over the long term. But we must also be watchful of pedaling too softly, whilst the rest of the world charges ahead. I'm mindful of the words of Abraham Lincoln, who says the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. What we knew before might not help us right now. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to the occasion. Our case is new, so we must think anew. We must act anew. And that thinking anew means acknowledging the acute challenges that we face now that we did not face in earlier times. And that's no way to diminish the cultural leadership skills of our forefathers and those who've gone before, but it says that actually in today's society, there are additional elements that we as a cultural leader need to be aware of. For example, the pace of change, just how much there is that you understand, which is no longer necessary within a short period of time. There is also the impact of technology. And there is now, more so than ever, a critical demand for values-based leadership. What do you think? Why do you think it? Why is it important? So some leadership requisites are permanent. The demands of leading creative risk, business innovation, workforce development, resource organization, stakeholder management. These are now compounded by the relentless pace and dynamic of change. That change is constant. And as cultural leaders, we need to make sure that we are also adaptive to change. We have to be able to run our institutions in today's environment, otherwise our institutions become very old, and the word traditional doesn't mean relevant, but it means past. So leaders have to be able to handle constant disruption, managing organizations and people through almost permanent cycles of change. It's not just the speed of change, it's also the impact of technology. We first encountered new technology as a marketing tool, reaching existing audiences with more sophisticated, personalized offers. But now new technology is changing what is art, what is creative practice, as well as how do we encounter it. It's impacting on the design, craft making and set design, technical complexity. It's also impacting on how we experience art, pushing the boundaries of theater. As we watch live relays of Shakespeare on huge cinema screens, or the new musical sounds and experiences created through hackathons and combined technology wizards with instrumental inventors, culture itself is changing and shifting with technology. It's important that this generation of cultural leaders, whether established or emerging, is able to deal with this element of complexity. With complexity and social media, we see that our leaders are constantly exposed. I'm speaking to you here in Moscow. My colleagues will be watching online. It'll be on YouTube. My children will tell me I didn't speak fast enough or slow enough. It's going, I don't know where. We can't control it in quite the same way. We have to understand that our cultural offer, once it's out there, it's out there. So it's important that we understand how we are dealing with social media. It's a 24-hour society. We can no longer speak off the record. There is no record. There's not even a CD anymore. I'm old. So, values-based leadership is completely critical to what we are doing. We need to understand ourselves as cultural professionals. We need to bring ourselves into the mix of cultural provision. In reality, these sector characteristics are not just for the cultural industries, but for industry itself, because actually we are no longer cultural organizations discrete or little idiosyncratic organizations run by eccentric visionaries. Rather, we see wonderfully creative and innovative businesses with transparent operations, breaking the mold, inspiring awe and creativity, creating new narratives, and sharing our world. with public responsibility, with fiscal prudence, and with transparent accountability. The eccentric visionaries are a bonus. So today's cultural leader needs a range of skills. Skills in entrepreneurship, in fundraising, in advocacy, communications, and you see I put fundraising twice, in people management, finance, and organizational development, governance, change. My heavens, running a cultural institution is not for the faint-hearted. You need to be strong. You need to know what you're doing. Today's cultural leaders need to have what we call resilience, which is the ability to lead our institutions, learn, make some mistakes, and then go back in there, get back on the horse, as it were. We need our cultural leaders to be strategic, to be opportunistic. They also have to have social resilience, and that's about the networks that you can access. If you're faced with any kind of challenge or opportunity, who can you call? How good is that network? Which is why creating programs that bring different people from different parts of the sector together is so important. You have to have an international awareness and an international outlook, because now we see our industry leaders traveling in different parts of the globe, bringing different parts of the globe into different areas. We are connecting not just online, but physically as well. That is now part of what culture is. Beyond the hard skills and the soft competencies, we need something that the leader must find for themselves. And this reflects the leader's perspective on life. For undoubtedly, we need leaders who will demonstrate a keen appetite for learning. It's that appetite for learning that will enable you to see difficult situations as an opportunity to do something differently. We need leaders who will understand that professional development doesn't stop when you have a title on your badge. In fact, that is just the beginning. So it's clear that we are asking our leaders to lead from the front of our sectors, through the middle of their organizations, and behind a weight of policy and industry challenges and change. It really is a big ask running our cultural institutions. We need leaders to be sharp enough to understand the leadership spectrum and wise enough to be able to conjure with its key challenges. We need them to be focused and yet flexible. We need them to keep our heritage safe, and we need them to be innovative. To achieve all of this, we need confident leaders who can work through the territory and gain an informed understanding of the world and their place within it. Leaders need to know how they can connect, how they can share, and how they can use sometimes slim resources to create both tangible and intangible infrastructures that supports them and helps them to support others. Leading culture requires you to stand clear and to stand tall, to observe the wider environment, to acknowledge the sector context and the specifics of your own field. You also have to be able to imagine the new, imagine the possible, imagine the different future, and to lead the way forward. It is demanding, it is challenging, but it is also one of the ways that we can change lives. It's one of the ways that we can create new narratives and make sense of our world. So it's a hugely valuable task, one that I really enjoy working in. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for your excellent lecture. You said that some methods were successful, but some were not so successful. Could you share some methods that you spread in your practice?
The question about some things that were successful and some that were not some things that were successful and some that were not so, thank you, successful. And I share them because it's important to learn from the things that did not work. So some of the things that did not work for us in the early days were when we tried to take experiences from one part of a cultural sector and just move it directly into another part. So we have programs that might work very well in theatre, for instance. Because theatre is very much a contemporary practice. It is a practice that has a moment at 7:30, usually in the UK. It lasts for a fixed amount of time. And so you need to have a sensibility to be able to deliver in that context. Not quite the same when you are working in a museum and it's about collections. It is about engaging with people through a longer period of the day. So we had to adjust some of our programs that we would take from one sector into another. And that's that thing about context, understanding the context. In the end, after the first 2 years, we moved away from working in individual sectors. We used to have work that we did in dance, in theatre, in museum, as well as geographical areas. And in the end, we moved into cross-sector provision, because this was one of the big learning from us, was that actually when you put different people together from different sectors and they understand what they are doing differently, that's where you breed success. Another one of the programs that was really successful, we developed a program for chief executives. Chief executives who have to work in the subsidized sector, but also in the commercial sector. So they can't depend just on state subsidy. They also have to go out and earn some money, and they have to be quite competitive. And we created a program specifically for people like this, so that this program was not about how do I become a leader. They are leaders. But this was very much about innovating. This was about trying to work well with people from different areas, but all with that commercial edge. And that was a really, really successful program. I mean, there are lots of different programs that we worked with. We were working over 5 years, and we were working across a broad spectrum. And one of the things that we did, which I think was really important, was that we commissioned the work. We didn't say, this is what you must have. We said, what would be good for you? And then we would bring people together.
Hello. I wanted to ask you, maybe you will find it strange, what was the push, what was the main driver for this system? It's such an amazing system. Were there many people that had these brilliant ideas that got together and did it? Or you were all individuals and everybody came with their own idea, so as a result, you created this great system. So what was at the beginning?
Okay, it was all my idea. I wish. No, that's a joke. Oh, sorry, that's the UK sense of humor. It was not my idea. Do not put that one on the video. No, that was a joke. That's a very UK joke. It was an idea that came from a lot of different people together, because this was an amazing opportunity. You're right. Even whilst we were in the middle of it, we were going, is this real? Somebody pinch me so that I wake up. It was a fantastic moment where we could pull all of our ideas together. If you might remember, one of the things that I talked about was doing a call for ideas. So we put out a call to the entire cultural leadership sector. Anybody who wanted to tell us, this is what I think is necessary, this is how you should do it, this is what is important, we should study these areas, we need online learning, we need practice. So that it was actually the sector's idea coming together. So it was the cultural sector came together. They gave us, we had, I can't remember how many thousands of responses to this call that came from the people working in culture. And we had an amazing time of reading them, analyzing them, clustering them. And that's how we came up with the I'm going to try and get back to it. That's how we came up with the idea of, there it is. That's how we came up with the idea of creating this range of provision. So this came from the cultural sector. We asked them, what do you need to know? How do you like to learn? And so we came up with courses, working in organizations, online, developing leadership for governance, diversity, and entrepreneurship. It was everybody's idea.
I mean, why did you decide to change? What was the reason?
Okay, so the reason for this was because in the UK back in the 1990s, our cultural institutions were being led by a range of individuals, and when those individuals left their jobs, there were not very many people that you looked around who could step into those roles. So we did not have within the UK any system of developing our cultural leadership practice. So we were sending our cultural leaders across to the States, to different parts of Europe, and we were also importing cultural leaders from those areas as well. But it became clear that we had no, what we call a pipeline. We had no system for developing cultural leaders. So that's why the change. It was to look at the fact that if we continue, we will have no one in the UK who has a systematic way of learning how to use culture. That was the driver.
Hello. My question is about fundraising. I can give you an example. For example, in Russia, most of cultural institutions depend on state funding, whereas in America, vice versa, there's a lot of sponsorship, corporate social responsibilities involved, and the state never really takes part in that. I don't know how it works in the UK, but I wonder how you worked with commercial sector, and if you could share some successful cases, some successful examples, especially in the context of crisis. I think it's very important for the whole sector. How does art marketing work? What do you do for marketing in art? So how do you work with business and culture?
Okay. So first, to explain the system in the UK, we are between the state system and the American system. So if you, in many parts of Europe and other parts of the world, you have a strong state funding. So an organization could have 100% or 80% of its funding coming from the government. Whereas, as you say, in the United States, it could be completely the other way. You could have a very small percentage coming from government, and you have to raise a lot of money from corporates or private philanthropists. In the UK, we are in the middle. The standard model for cultural organizations in the UK now, it wasn't always the way, but now, is to have 3 areas of funding. About 30% will come from government, 30, sometimes 50%, depending, if, particularly for smaller organizations. 30% you will raise from sponsorship, from corporate sponsors or trusts and foundations. So you will raise that from institutions. And then about 30% or so you will raise from your box office, your ticket prices, you will raise from your core business. So in the UK, we have those 3 sources, and it's usually around 30 or so % of each one. So it's spread across. It's neither the 100% funded or 100% not funded model. So it means that you have to develop the muscles to navigate a range of different stakeholders. You have to be able to navigate the stakeholders who are the state, and what is it that they pride, what are the questions for a state funder in terms of community, in terms of responding to perhaps a local area or a national ambition. in that 30%, which is for corporate sponsorship or trusts or foundations, you have to enter the market. So you have to understand, if it's a corporate sponsor, what is it that they are looking for? So if you are one of the big opera houses or one of the big theaters, it's great because you can say, oh, come to my performance. I've got this person or that person, or come to my exhibition. We have a grand opening and, you can be feted and there's lots of wine. So it's great if you have an institution for those corporate sponsors. If you don't, it becomes harder because you have to really work with sponsors who are interested in the work that you're doing itself. You do not have the ability necessarily to be able to do so much of the wining and dining and making them feel amazing. But you also have in the UK model to keep engaging with the people who are paying for your service. You have to make sure that you have a good relationship with the audiences that are coming through your doors because they are about a third of your income as well. So you have to develop the capacity to respond to different stakeholders. In terms of the programs that we initiated, what we tried to do was to encourage an awareness, and I talked about developing the muscles of entrepreneurship. One of the good things about entrepreneurial thinking is that you look at the status quo, you look at where we are, and you focus on where do I want to be. You look at what we have and you focus on what more do I want to have. And you develop this attitude of really developing your capacity, developing your ideas, thinking about if I'm going to create a creative piece of art or work, who will be interested in this? And how can I engage them to make sure that they support my work? So by developing that entrepreneurial thinking, we were encouraging individuals and cultural institutions to be able to operate more creatively and more dynamically within the environment in the UK, which requires you to have both the state funding and the corporate funding and the funding that comes through your paying customers.
Thank you very much. Sounds all true.
Hello, Hilary, thank you very much for your lecture. I have a question about your program. Did you address a question about how cultural leaders and cultural institutions can help when there is a certain tension in some regions, for example, like in Northern Ireland, as far as I know, or sort of how can a cultural institution influence this to improve the situation, to develop a peaceful dialogue between enemies?
So I think it's important to understand that as cultural activists, we can intervene in social issues and social dilemmas, but we don't have to. And this is what I said in the beginning about the intrinsic as well as the instrumental value of the arts. As someone who's come through arts practice, it is important that we have art which is developing the individual, which is developing society, which is developing creativity and understanding who we are, why we are, and our place in the world. That's really important. But we can also use art and creativity and creative practice to be really effective in places of conflict, to be really effective in bringing people together who have opposing views, who do not think the same. So there's something about working with creativity that lowers the hierarchy, that actually says what we are dealing with here is our innovation, is our response to the issue, as opposed to our historical background or where we are. If you put a line down, one is on the right and one is on the left. So culture has a fantastic role that it can play in just bringing people together who don't necessarily share the same views, but who can work on a creative outcome where their different histories, their different perspectives can be really helpful. So what we tried to do was to encourage the experience of cultural leaders that they can work in that instrumental way. But we did not want to say everybody must turn themselves into culture for an instrumental outcome or for a social outcome. We felt it was very important that we nurtured and cultivated both sides of the argument. So one of the things that we wanted to develop was the issue of being able to lead without having authority. So if you can't call everybody together, if you are not the person who's the most senior, if you don't have all the advantages, how can you still have impact? What can you do? Because when you're negotiating with someone who does not believe the same thing as you can't just tell them do this and they will do that, or think this and they will think that. You have to be able to understand, gain some empathy, and work from a different place. So the issue of leading without authority, of understanding how you can use creative practice as a form of bringing people together, is something that we cultivated. But I think it's important to say that what we were trying to do was to develop cultural leadership ability. And we wanted to make sure that we could encourage cultural leaders to work within their context. So some of that context was in different parts of society. Some of those contexts were about just developing completely new innovations with cultural practice where there hasn't been any kind of history of culture. We needed to create cultural leaders who have the flexibility, but who have an appetite for innovation. And that can work whether you're dealing with art for art's sake or whether you're dealing with art as a mediator.
Good evening, thank you for your lecture. I'm a little bit shy to ask my questions, but I would like to ask it anyway, because this is more about, it's related to people that are already leaders, they are recognized leaders. So it's clear with that. But for example, let's take students or those people that are just thinking about some projects who want to contribute, to make a contribution into arts and culture. So do you have any programs for beginners, those people that are they don't have much experience or knowledge? For example, speaking about Russia and public institutions, it's very difficult to get work there because there are very limited opportunities. People stay there and work for 50 years, sometimes even longer, all their life. So what would you recommend to the beginners, to the leaders who are beginners? What should they start with? Where should they apply? What to do?
Oh, it's always the same. You have to stand next to these old people and bump them like this. Just kind of, oh, please give up your seat so that I can have some. It's very hard. It's very hard in the UK. It's not easy because culture, in very many places, you get into that leadership role, you look across, you look to the left, you look to the right, and you say, well, where else can I go? There's nowhere. If I give up this seat, then I will have no seat. And that's how it is sometimes in our sector. But if, as a cultural leader, you develop a spirit of generosity, then it doesn't have to be that way. Because if we can work with younger people, with the next generation, and help them to develop the skills, then what we are doing is we are looking at how our institutions and our culture can be sustainable over the long term. So you'll remember from the diagram that I showed you the issue of mentoring. So that, okay, I might be in my seat at the moment, but how can I help other people who are at an earlier stage to develop the skills so that they can be where I am, not today, but over time. And so it's important as cultural leaders that we develop the next generation, we mentor them. We should each have someone, at least one person, that we are nurturing, that we are providing some opportunities for. So it's important when you are starting out, you have to find your way. And that is tough. I do not pretend that it's very easy. But certainly in the UK, one of the things that younger leaders do is through volunteering. It's not necessarily the most lucrative or the most sexy of ways, but it gets you into an institution, it gets you into cultural practice, it gets you into a festival. And until you gain some experience, actual experience of working with something, it's very hard to come into that role. But if you walk alongside cultural practice, it's really an effective way of getting into the cultural sector. The other thing to do is to create your own. You know, it's really interesting to see how certainly cultural entrepreneurs in the UK are saying, okay, so there's that on this side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create this here. And there's a lot of power now in new networks that are being created that are saying, okay, there is that cultural institution and I can't quite get in there, but what can I do here? What can I do with the network that I have? A number of institutions, university institutions in the UK are creating what we call cultural hubs, where individuals who've come through their cultural courses can start to develop their creative practice just within or on the side of the university. And those are good places to be. We're creating cultural centers, cultural and creative hubs, so that you have experienced leaders sharing their knowledge and experience with less inexperienced leaders. It's about moving alongside, or it's about creating something that's independent. But what I will not pretend is that it's very easy. Us old people, we just have to get up. We just have to get up. This is the answer.
Thank you very much for such inspiring lecture. To sum up the things you said, so what's different between cultural leaders and business leaders? And what business leaders can learn from cultural leaders?
Okay. I can answer that question in so many different ways. At the heart of it, leadership is leadership. You are leading people, you are leading practice, you are leading organizations, you are leading in contemporary society. So the specifics of what you are leading, you are still leading. If you look at leading a business and leading a cultural entity, institution, or practice, one of the key challenges is in that area of risk. Because if you look at a traditional business, that traditional business can be trying to avoid risk. They can be minimizing risk. Whereas the cultural leader has to play with risk as the business of culture. We have to be innovative. We have to push the boundaries. We have to experiment for society. We have to be the ones that push forward, that go into the unknown and say, this is what it is. So I think that's one of the key differences. We have to embrace creative risk as part of what we do. So risk is high on our agenda, and we have to create the kinds of infrastructure that enable and support risk-taking. And that's very specialized in terms of our cultural sector. But I think that in the final analysis, we have to learn to manage creative risk alongside that core business acumen of leading people and leading practice. And that leading people and leading practice requires you to understand the dynamics of the people and the dynamics of your sector. And whether that sector is creative or whether it's manufacturing, what you have to understand is what you as a leader bring to it, how you can work well with your people, and what's your vision for the future. That's essentially what we do, but we put that vision right at the heart.
У нас осталось время на один последний.
We have time only for one last question.
Thank you so much for coming. Your meeting with you is very inspiring. And you mentioned the extreme importance of non-stop education. What was the latest course you have taken by yourself?
Okay. So the latest course that I have done has been about change. And it's been about how to be professional when everything is still changing around you. Because this, for me, is one of the dynamics of the experienced leader. We have to still be able to perform, to inspire our organizations, and yet we don't know what is going to happen, and it's not like it was previously. But we still have to stand up and, give that confidence. And so for the latest course that I did was about handling change.
Спасибо.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed.